Hey, Lead Up Podcast listeners, this is Mike Harbour, another great interview episode as we kick off 2025. This is episode 423 of the Lead Up Podcast, where we're going to talk about all things leadership. I'm really excited to invite a new guest on with me today. His name is Garrett Deff, and I'm excited to learn from Garrett. We're going to talk about leadership and the effects of maybe ineffective leadership models that are out there. We're going to talk about some things you can do effectively to lead better in the workplace that you're in. We're going to talk about how to create clarity, remove some fog and some confusion in the marketplace or in your voice of leadership with your teams to really get them to be more effective in the things that you need them to do. So, Garrett, welcome to the Lead Up Podcast. So glad you're here.
Thanks so much, Mike. I appreciate you having me. Really excited to have a good conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you as well. Before we go too far, let's just let you introduce yourself to the Lead Up Podcast listeners. You know, we've got listeners all over the world, but tell the listeners a little bit about you, your background, and what you believe in about leadership.
Well, sure. Happy to. So, quick backstory to my journey to present day. Went to college, got into corporate America. Over about 8 years, learned a ton, by the way, learned a ton. That was really great fodder for my journey to becoming an entrepreneur. Really became underwhelmed with my experiences at the end of the day. Quit my job, cashed in my 401k, all $13,000 of it. I felt like I was the richest man on the planet. Started a couple of side hustles. One of them actually was driving town cars, of all things,
Hmm.
for super rich businessmen. One of them, by the way, was Michael Abrashoff. I got to
Oh,
drive
yeah.
Michael Abrashoff. I wrote the book.
Turn the ship around, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Anyways, that led me into a couple of startups. At the end of the day, I built, a few international businesses in product and service, scaled those to decent revenue, hired 550 employees plus, managed large teams, brought SaaS to market. And during that journey, because I didn't know what I was doing, made a ton of mistakes. Fortunately, those mistakes turned into opportunities and benefits as a result. And mostly those are the things that led me to establishing Clarity Ops, which is what I'm doing now, which is a bespoke tools that help businesses reorganize for speed and strength sustainably. And those tools are essentially systems and frameworks that are bespoke to what I've built, that are easy to adapt, and can be used in most businesses where you have people and process.
Hmm.
So that's what's going on. And the culmination of all of that, I think maybe one other thing worth noting, Mike, is one thing I did really bad for half of my journey leading up to here was caring for people. Because I was a kind of win at all cost. I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware of this, but it was win at all cost, even at the cost of the great people I was hiring and paying extremely well. And so part of what these frameworks do and these tools do is they also are built to support and empower and uphold people. So their stress goes down, their happiness goes up, and that's all based on infrastructure. So that's what's going on.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll get into talking about a couple of those tools that help do that. I'm a believer in systems and processes to help us lead more effectively. And if you have made a bunch of mistakes, like you say you have in leadership, you're an expert at leadership because that's what it takes, right? To make some mistakes. I mean, leadership is one of the hardest things to do
Yeah.
in the world, because it's easy to build a widget, but to lead other people to build that widget alongside of you in the same way and
Yeah.
scale it and do it with the same quality that we want done is sometimes harder to do, that communication piece. So you're, you know,
Well
you're a
said.
you're a leadership expert, I would say, if you've done that, if you've made a few mistakes in that regard. But let's talk about mastering leadership. you've obviously done it for a while,
Yeah.
and talk about some secrets in effective management. It's certainly one of those things that countless leaders wrestle with, right? How do
Yeah.
we effectively lead people? So how do you approach helping leaders effectively manage and grow their teams? Because you've done that up to 500 people
Yeah.
in one organization. So what are some
Yeah.
ideas you have about doing that now from your experience?
Yeah. I agree with you, by the way. I think leading people is got to be, I guess, we're biased, but it's got to be one of the most difficult things out there. And I do appreciate your thoughts on me being an expert. I prefer fellow traveler,
Mm,
uh, you know, but here are a couple of things I've learned. I think you need a well-balanced combo of strong soft skills and very strong hard tools. I guess they could be soft tools too. I think for the soft skills part, I'm a big fan of what Bill Campbell um, uh, was quoted in the book The Trillion Dollar Coach. He said, you cannot be a great leader unless you were first a great manager. And he goes on to talk about management is the application of excellence.
mm,
And so, as a result of reading that book and putting some things together, I came up with a little acronym that I think is really appropriate for what we're talking about. And that is leaders should eat a slice of pie every day. And PIE is an acronym for professional, integrity, and EQ, or emotional intelligence.
mm,
So for as far as soft skills go, you need to be professional in your behavior.
mhm,
You have to have integrity. Like, you can't be a liar. You can't be deceitful. People will sniff that and smell that a mile away, and they'll
mhm,
disrespect you. And you have to have empathy. You got to really be able to um, understand people and have some grace and consider where they're coming from in order to be effective. So I'd say, like, eating a slice of pie every day is critical to the soft skill component.
mhm,
Um, Another maybe little quote I really love is, great leaders need great systems and great systems need great leaders. They're inseparable. And so, in my opinion, in order for a leader to be effective in their business, irrespective of where they fall on the org chart, is they need to have infrastructure. They need to have governance. There needs to be rails, because they're not the ones executing. They are
mhm,
leading the people who are executing. And people need directions. They need
mhm,
instructions. Uh, you, you know, that increases as you move down towards the Genba, right? Strategy obviously is kind of, the place where less rails, and you're paid to work with less rails. But most people in an organization, they need instructions. And so when you take those professional soft skills of a leader, and a leader has great systems that they can um, put people into, I think you have a really lovely winning combo for success.
yeah. Yeah, I love eating pie, but that bite of empathy and emotional intelligence was probably the one I had to work hardest on, right?
Yeah.
The professionalism was, that was probably the easy one for me, because I think to me, it's easy to be a pro. Not all people are pros, right? Like I tell leaders every day, you're a pro, you're a professional leader today. And a
Mm.
lot of leaders I work with I do a lot of work in the healthcare space. So they were trained to be a nurse or a physical therapist or a pharmacist or whatever. But when you step into leadership, you're now a professional leader. So we've got to go to work on becoming a pro, like practicing leadership. And what pros do is, they get better. They work on those skills. You call them soft skills. I like to call them essential,
Okay,
because
fair enough.
there's nothing soft about communicating with someone else, right?
I actually really I like essentials. I agree 100%.
I
Yeah.
mean, they're hard, but for me, being a pro is the easy part. Um, but sometimes being a pro, just for maybe you and I, we're maybe around the same age. Garrett, being a pro meant to us like dress the part, look good, show up to work on time, work hard, work your 8 hours a day, go home, whatever, or
Yeah.
work 10 hours a day and go home, whatever. But there's more to that in leadership, right? Like being a pro is being integrous and
Yeah.
and also being a pro is being empathetic and developing that emotional intelligence, as you call it, that E part of the pie. And I had to go to work there. Like if I was going to be a pro, I had work to do there because I'm not naturally empathetic,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Yeah.
took me a while to learn. I feel like I'm really good at emotional intelligence today, but it took me a while to get there. So, what are some tools that, or books, or coaching you would give our listeners today to go to work on the professionalism, integrity, and emotional intelligence?
Well, I, I I really appreciate you digging into the P of pie, which is professional. Because I actually think that there's a ton of opportunity there for leaders if they want to set themselves apart and really be effective. There's a ton of opportunity there. For example, planning.
Mm,
Have you pre-planned all of your initiatives when you're ready to execute, when you go into meetings,
mm,
right? Are you clear about where you're going? And are you clear about how you're going to take your people there?
mm.
Like those two alone, if you can master as a leader, you will be set apart. You will be a bright light compared to other leaders that are frantically all over the place.
Yeah.
Oh, you were going to say something,
I,
Mike?
I, I coach, I teach this every day, and
You
I'm
do.
going to let you continue your thought, but I tell leaders the most important meeting you have every day is the meeting with self.
Mm,
Like that planning, right? If I'm going to go meet with one of my employees, or I'm going to go meet with one of my colleagues, or I'm going to go meet with my boss, I need to have a meeting with self first to pre-plan that. Like, what am I going to say? How am I going to show up? Do I come to that meeting with an agenda, or do I just come to a meeting like empty-handed with, nowhere to go?
yeah.
And so I think when you hit the nail on the head, that meeting with self, I call it starting on purpose, right? That's your SOP.
That's good.
Your SOP, which standard operating procedure, are starting on purpose. So I want to let you finish your thought, but I
I
love
like
that you
that.
brought that to the table.
I've never heard that starting on purpose. I love it. I love it. Yeah, I think other things like just on the, under the professional pillar, expectations management,
Mm,
and being purposeful about that, I think is again a essential. It's essential, rarely used. I think another part, a very unpopular component of being professional is accountability
mm,
and understanding your role as a leader. That is, it's almost the opposite side to empathy. Empathy has grace, it has understanding. It has at times a very long leash, depending on circumstances. But the flip side to that, and I would contend the balance, which is the other side of pie or the P, is listen, we are hired as people in an organization to get a job done, and that job has to get done, whatever it is, and it is the job of a leader, whether they delegate this or they do it themselves, is to ex, expect from the people what they were hired to do, and be razor clear that that is part of your expectation,
mm.
and go then inspect to get the expectation. So I'd say those four things. Any leader masters those four things. You are creme de la creme.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you brought accountability into it. I believe most leaders expect accountability, but where they fail is what you said. They fail to set clear expectations around what accountability is, right?
Yeah.
And they also maybe fail in their own accountability for follow-up.
Yeah.
I think as a leader, we're accountable first to be good leaders, to be professional leaders, and that may mean that you've got to have some follow-up. And I think, I said, Garrett, empathy is one of the biggest challenges I have in leadership, but I think part of being an empathetic leader is having the hard conversations around expectations and accountability.
Yeah.
Because what happens is when I fail to do those, and I'm just speaking about myself right now, when I fail to have the conversation around expectations and what
Yeah.
accountability looks like in meeting those. When I fail to do that, then I'm less empathetic. I start judging. I let my judgment of others, well, they're just lazy, they didn't listen, they don't care about the
Oh,
job. I start getting into where I start labeling people versus leading people in those places. Anything you'd like to add to that?
no, I think you are. I mean, sure, yes, I have a ton of comments, but I think you're spot on. I think you're spot on. You know, if you're not as a leader proactively measuring and then following up on those measurements, whether it's in applause or reward or high five or um, counsel, coaching, feedback to course correct
Mm,
in one way or the other, then you're setting a stage for everybody to understand that you don't care.
yeah,
You don't care about their performance. And
yeah.
then to your point, uh, I, I wrote an article a while ago called The Management Expectations Gap.
Mm.
And what managers tend to do is they tend to um, think everybody knows what they're thinking. It's a big problem.
Yeah,
And when managers don't hold or leaders don't hold people accountable, they know what's going on in their head, but everybody else thinks they don't care. And
yeah,
I think that ties really nicely into what you were suggesting, which is, I think, a very common thing for all of us. You know, it's really easy to fall into that negative rhythm. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I love that. One of my questions to the leaders I do coaching and training with is, okay, I know you thought that, but did you share that thought,
Oh, that's good.
right? Did you share it? Because
I
you're so right. I mean, so many leaders that I've worked with, they think they've shared something, but really all they did is had the thought. They didn't go out and communicate
Yeah.
clearly out
Yeah.
there. So I love those thoughts that you brought to that.
You know, Mike, I
Go
was going to
ahead.
say, I think I know you thought that, but did you communicate it? I think I see you showing up to your next event and bringing T-shirts
Yeah, that's good. That's
and
good.
throwing them out, dude.
I
That's a
might.
wonderful statement.
There's a new idea. Thank you for that, Garrett. I love it. Love it. So, um, I believe that every person has value, and we don't necessarily always treat them that way. You kind of admitted at the top of the show that you weren't really good at that, right? You maybe
Yeah.
drove people. You were more focused on the results, the outcomes of the bottom line, or the revenue than you were the people. And I think one of the big challenges, issues we have in the world today, Garrett, is people don't feel valued for their efforts. In your generation, my generation, we grew up, just show up, work hard, do your job, you get a paycheck every 2 weeks. That was the way we felt valued. But this generation is different, and so we have to lead better. And
Mm.
I wrote about this in my book, Power Principles, and the principle is, leaders must create a plan to add value to others.
Mm.
We often plan our task. We plan our to-do list. Like, I got to get this done. I got to write that proposal. I got to call this person. I got to get this deal closed. So we focus on the things that add maybe revenue to the bottom line, and we often forget about the people that help us create that
Yeah,
revenue, right? And so I'm
that's
I'm a
right.
big believer in and again, when I wrote this book, this was really about me, Garrett, is because I struggle most in that empathetic, compassionate, relational side of leadership. I'm pretty good at it today, but early in my life, I was not really good at it. I was just like, hey, we got a hill to climb. Let's go. And so I
Yeah.
had to create a system, a plan, a process for myself to add value to people. And I
Mm.
learned from my mentor. One of my mentors is John Maxwell, and he said, if you get to the top of the hill and you're alone, you simply are a hiker. You're not a leader,
Oh,
right? And basically, what he's saying is, if you don't take people with you, you just took a hike. You
yeah.
didn't lead anybody anywhere. So, when people feel seen, valued, understood, they're going to work harder for us. They're going to stay with us longer. They'll give us a better effort. What are some practical examples you have that or you've applied in the organizations you've led and the organizations you've worked with to help them do that. Maybe you got a tool in your bespoke methods to do something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. But maybe that's for another time, maybe today, who knows? But I think I can answer that question. Um, you know, here's been my experience. Um, Valuing people through uh, eating pie is one very good step. And I think especially valuing people with your words respectfully and you know valuing them through great behavior as people, valuing them by telling them, hey, I actually really appreciate what you got going on, and communicate what you're doing, and communicating how reminds me of the spark plug in a vehicle engine. If one spark plug dies, that entire engine ceases to run. And I think using those kind of metaphors as leaders to understand that everybody's valuable in the business engine. So those sort of things I think are really great. I do emphatically believe, however, that they need to be load balanced with infrastructure that demonstrates care for the people. Things like a a sorry a career path. Sorry, things
Hmm.
like a career path, like just a career path that is upheld by the organization, that shows and cares for them and says, if you join an organization, here's a path you can take to learn more, make more money, and get a better title. And we promise that if you follow through these steps, there's a very good chance you could achieve these things as long as you're capable, right? Like that's a big deal. I think another really important thing for leaders, for example, caring for people, because you got to care for leaders too, are establishing leadership agreements. And again, these are load balancing up against pie, but this is infrastructure that helps leaders feel unified, and it gives them agreements to lock into and hold one another accountable to. I think that's really important. I think another way, a great way to care for people with your, more than just pie, but governance, is giving them clear job descriptions. So on my side of the business, we have 13 tools within this people column that businesses can lock into and go, deploy to their business using systematic governance that actually shows their people they care for them. So those would be three examples, for example, Mike, that I think are great ways to also care for people.
Yeah, that's really good. I think we could dig a lot deeper, but I want to make sure we move on because I know you've answered some of what we're going to get to next already, but I think we can go a little deeper with this next question. You have a term you call management vertigo,
Yeah.
which is a big challenge leaders face. Kind of describe what you mean by management vertigo, and then how do you help leaders remove some of that confusion?
Yeah. My experience is very similar to yours regarding the book that you wrote. It came from your personal journey. And I coined management vertigo because I went through years of struggling with just constantly feeling disoriented and confused and unable to prioritize. And the amount of demand on my human RAM far exceeded my capability as a founder, as a CEO. And that was really this idea of you just feel it feels like you have vertigo as a leader, and it is and it affects you. You end up being paralyzed in ways, and increasingly, the more that vertigo sets in, the more you become ineffective, and then that ineffectiveness cascades into the people that you lead, and cascades into the function or functions that you lead. which again, going through that was led me on a journey to figure out how to solve it. You know?
So what'd you do? How'd you solve it?
Yeah. Well, I think the short and sweet of it is I needed to measure what I was managing. And in order to do that, I needed to understand the engine parts that needed to be managed. At the end of the day, it was that rudimentary. I mean, getting there is more complex, but that's the nuts and bolts of it. You know, you got to understand. You know, working backwards, I think, is a nice way to approach it. You look at, what are the business outcomes you need and want to deliver to your end user? And then as you back into that, you go, okay, well, what do you need to do to produce those outcomes? And then so, those to-dos need to be filled with hows.
Mhm.
How do you do the things to produce the outcome? And then you build controls within those how-tos. And those controls are rooted in benchmarking and, speak diagnostics and, other org chart functions. And then you create expectations around turnaround time deliveries, whatever they are. And then you set up measuring mechanisms for these, which set expectations. So now what you end up with, one of the tools we have is called a workflow journey map. What you end up with is a map that you can give to people to follow. And you have a map as a leader that you can watch and monitor, which is tied to these KPIs or built by benchmarks. And then suddenly it becomes very simple and easy to be clear, and then this is my whole story there was eliminating vertigo. Suddenly you have clarity about what the business is doing and what it needs and who does what, when, why, and how. And that was a 10-year journey, Mike, to get there,
Mhm.
to build infrastructure, to do this repeatedly, time and time again. But once you have these things, vertigo goes away.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think the key thing there is what you just mentioned there toward the end is clarity, right? I mean, I kind of have a framework I teach around four corner posts to high performance, right? And the first one is get clear. It's
Yeah.
it's the beginning with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey taught us in Seven Habits, right? I mean, we sometimes as leaders, when we have vertigo, and I've had vertigo before, I mean, all you can do is really sit down, right? But
Yeah.
as leaders, when you're experiencing that fog, so to speak,
Yeah.
the answer is not go faster, do more. The answer is maybe to sit down and get clear, create some clarity for yourself. Because if you're not clear as the leader, Garrett, I think you would agree with this, then you can't create clarity for other people. You just create even more confusion and vertigo and stress on yourself as a leader. Would you
That's
agree
right.
or push back on that a little bit?
I would agree. I would agree. I think it's maybe it rages against not only logic but probably science. If you're not clear, there's no way you can bring clarity to others.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, look, in my work as a coach and developer other people, that's probably where I spend most of my time. I was doing some interview training with three people from an organization I'm working with today, teaching them how to interview candidates because they're having a hard time selecting the right people. They have a lot of turnover in their, short period of time, that hard bounce, first 90 days. And it really comes from they're not really clear on what they want. They think they just need a warm body, right?
Yeah,
They've got some openings and they just need a warm body, but the reality is they need some other things. They need to slow down and create a clear path to selection and interviewing to make sure we don't just, hey, Garrett, can you breathe? Okay, we'll hire you, right? It's got to go beyond that. And again, I'm making fun. That's not all they're doing, but
yeah, sure, sure.
essentially, will you show up to work? Yes. Okay, you're hired. And I'm trying to teach them to go beyond that
Yeah,
because and it begins with clarity. Like, what do you want? What are some of the issues you're having with the people you're hiring? what do you really want? And,
Yep.
let's get clear about that. Let's create the right interview questions and process and that's just a simple thing, right? I mean, to me, it's simple. I've interviewed tens of thousands of people, but
Hmm.
um, again, it's if we're not clear about hiring the right people, it's going to
Yep.
create confusion, vertigo in a lot of those other areas. I'm sure, if you built a team of 500 people, Garrett, I mean, I'm sure you didn't get it right every time, did you, when you're hiring people?
No, but I will tell you, as we built, well, as we built, one of our tools is a recruitment workflow journey, and that encompasses A to Z, every player in the entire life cycle of recruiting.
Hmm.
And have we mapped that entire journey all the way down to micro activities. When we got there and they'd had leaders that would deploy those playbooks, I will tell you, there were a few mistakes. There are a few mistakes. But when you have a plan like that and you deploy it, magic happens.
Yeah.
Really, magic happens. And I think there are. I think both you and I and any leader on this planet, we need to be careful about the term clarity because your mileage will vary depending on how you define the term. You know, there's
Hmm.
macro clarity and there's micro clarity, and if you confuse the two, you'll end up back in vertigo.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
really will. And
I like
so
that.
I think it's worth, every organization, every business, they have obviously the right and the privilege to define what clarity is. But I have found, I learned this just from reading Carnegie and some Berkshire Hathaway stuff too, about the power of living inside of the business engine. And the reason I love that metaphor is because, especially in the gasoline engine, we're talking about hundreds of moving parts,
Hmm.
micro moving parts. And if you think about all of the great effort Formula One goes to build a world-class engine, if we think about all of the micro mechanisms that go into building playbooks for a world-class basketball team, or a world-class soccer football team, like they get into the micro, and businesses don't generally. And I
Hmm.
think we could learn a lot from that. And tying it back to clarity, I really think, as Steve Jobs says, most businesses don't think deeply about their business. And I believe that is a differentiator. It's a
Yeah.
big differentiator. And I also believe that's why 9 in 10 businesses fail, because they don't think deeply about their business and they don't think deeply about clarity and how to architect for clarity so that you get speed and agility and strength and ultimately the gross profit and the hockey stick growth you're looking for. And if you do it that way, by the way, funny enough, the people end up being happier. The
Mm.
lifetime value of the employment cycle is longer. Stress is lower, right? This is fascinating.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't know the author of the book. I think there's a book. It's what Slow Down to Go Fast or something
Oh, I've
like
heard that.
that. It's most leaders are really good, as you described it, at macro clarity, vision, like big picture, right? We can see the big
Yeah,
picture, but then it's coming back and saying, okay, how are we going to get there?
that's
Creating the
right.
clarity of the path to get there. Most leaders, they 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 may have been able to do that at one time in their life, but as they get further away from it, right, they lose that ability to come back and maybe walk in the shoes of the people that now they lead to create that. They just expect it to happen.
Yeah.
And I spend a lot of time like, okay, we to get where you want to go, we don't have to stop, but we need to take our foot off the gas for a little while, slow down so we can put some pieces in place to speed up.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, that's right.
because and it's like this one company I just mentioned earlier that I'm working with. They have a constant churn of turnover. It's not a cultural issue. They have a great culture, but they have some interview and onboarding processes that aren't in place.
Mm.
Selection and onboarding pieces that aren't really there to make sure one we hire the right people and then launch them effectively for the first 90 days. They're hiring not the right people, and then they bring them in and they just kind of put them to work and not really building up, that runway for the first 90 days. And so I'm trying to help them build
Oh,
those
good.
pieces in place, right? But
Totally.
that's what you're talking about. Yeah, we need to hire people. That's macro, but okay, now let's get down to we're hiring them. Why are we losing them, right? And why can we not effectively keep people?
Yeah.
And so
I
that's
I think like,
a micro piece that you're talking about. Go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, maybe some other micro parts are. I'm working with a construction company just up the freeway from here. They got 165 employees, have, in general living in the 50 million a year revenue threshold, but are losing 2 million bucks a quarter. They couldn't figure out why.
Hmm.
Well, speaking of micro, because they don't have control of their internal knowledge transfer, as people would come and go, they didn't have a mechanism for updating their estimator cost calculators,
Hmm.
right? So this is just one example of micro, and I think it's really important for the context here to remember the idea of a business engine. So this calculator became legacy, outdated, and at the end of the day, it broke.
Hmm.
And it was the main source of their bleed because their suppliers changed, their tools changed, their ingredients changed, their materials changed, but the estimator calculator never changed as the business grew and transformed. So and then the result ultimately is frustrated leaders because their head are on the chopping block, bleeding cash. And so there's one, I think, a small example of a micro component in a business that needed to be maintained and wasn't. And when you multiply these micros across an org vertically and horizontally, and they all start to break or in fits and starts, that's when you have trouble.
Yeah.
And that's, I think anyway, it's sort of like Disneyland for me to go in and find these things.
Mm.
But I'm fascinated by that, And what we do is you know, external communities and maybe riders that report on the stats. We go, they're bad with cash flow, product market fit. Nobody's paying attention to the business room, or sorry, the engine room. I
Mm.
don't think, And my hypothesis is, this is where the this is where the focus belongs. That's why I said great leaders need great systems. Great systems need great leaders to maintain and manage them and continuously improve them.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Yeah, those are those things you mentioned, the bleeding cash, right? That's a symptom of something, inside, typically a smaller thing that we often don't look at.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love that. We could talk about that all day. Just a couple more things I want to get into before we wrap up,
Okay. Yeah.
Eric. Just bad management practices and overcoming them. What are some bad habits you've seen, observed, and that leaders need to be aware of that we're talking to today, and how can they overcome them?
I think it's worth repeating many of the points we've already talked about, actually, Mike.
Mm.
I think, one of the, um, you know, very high consequence behaviors for bad management, bad leadership is being a bad communicator
Mhm.
and really having not taken the time to be clear about what you want and what you expect and how you expect your team to get there. I, you know, if we ran out of time right now, I'd say that that alone will save a ton of heartache and loss. Um, so communication, I think also planning. We talked about this earlier. Really taking a bite out of the pea in pie as a
Mhm.
professional and understanding that it is your role as a leader and manager to be well planned, really well planned. I think SMART is a great acronym, by the way, to apply to that. Um, and yep, I think those two are huge.
Yeah, I think if you get those two right, again, they're soft but essential skills, right? I mean, it's communication is something that we have to continually work on and sharpen. It's the number one thing in my work with companies that I have to work on, right? It's it and some bad habits of communication that I see. So just taking that a little bit kind of deeper, communication,
Yeah.
yes, but bad habits that leaders have in communicating using email. I think email, when you and I were coming up, it was an effective communication tool that is no longer effective
Mm,
because too many leaders now use it to communicate. And the reality is, Garrett, most of us get inundated with emails. Statistically, some of the things I've read out there that if the CEO sends an email, only 50% of the organization will even look at the email.
no kidding.
And then less than 50% of those that look at it will actually read it. We're all scrollers today, right? We scroll, we don't read. And so, email is a tool, it's not the tool. But the bad habit within communication is using email as the tool and then wondering why no one responds, no one's getting the work done that you need to do. So I think I think we got to get back to some old school communication, some face to face, right? And
Sure.
technology is a good look. We can use Zoom today. This is face to face conversation, right? But
Yep.
it's using
That's right.
technology to do it. Is email is technology, but it's not as effective as even a Zoom conversation is, like we're on today,
Yeah.
as as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
agree. I think, going back to your question earlier, bad practices, not giving feedback. I think
yeah,
that is a bad practice.
sure is.
Not, not, we talked about this earlier, but not holding your people accountable out of fear that you're not going to be liked or loved, or you're just not professional in that way. That's another
Mhm.
bad practice, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. We could spend even more time on that. But yeah, the again, these are things, and thank you for being a guest on the Lead Up podcast. These are things that they seem simple, but they're
Yeah.
not easy, right? Or what's the old saying? What's simple to do is also simple not to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
They seem simple, but the challenge is like just even like being a professional, as you talk about planning is really simple to do if you have a system in place to plan and you make it part of your routine, but it's also simple not to do. Oh, I don't need to plan for that meeting. I just go in there and
Yeah.
then we go in there and wing it. And then we create confusion, right? Because we're not ready to give the feedback that needs to be given, or we're not ready to
Yeah.
create realistic expectations because we didn't plan out that end result that we're after. So those things that are simple are also simple not to do
Yeah.
because we make excuses like I'm too busy. I don't have
Right.
time to do that. Well, my question is, do you have time to keep doing what you're doing?
Yeah,
Right?
right. Do you have time to continue to have vertigo and be confused and cause your people to be confused, you know?
That's right.
You know,
That's
Mike,
right.
I was thinking, just listening to myself chat, um, I was thinking, at least I've noticed if I'm not careful when talking about these opportunities and listen, it's heavy lifting, and I've realized if I'm not careful, it could really sound like talking people out of being a great leader. And maybe that is part of the goal.
Mhm.
But I, I feel like there's a flip side to this. If the organization were to take responsibility to define what they value, and let's assume that all of these things we talked about, which are best practices, get built into a core value playbook,
Mm.
and then the business supports the leaders and locks arms with the leaders to uphold these values. I actually, think that accomplishing and utilizing all of these tools and best practices becomes infinitely easier because the whole team is in on it.
Mhm.
Where it becomes almost futile and extremely difficult is when you're kind of one or twosie leaders that want to be great, but the business won't support you in valuing them also.
Yeah.
So I think that's I just want to make sure I add that into the narrative for today because I think for any business owners or founders that are listening that listen to you and heard our conversation that think it's valuable, it's got to start from the top.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Absolutely. Yeah. If it doesn't, it's a dead end, right? It doesn't. And, I think Garrett and I would both want to say that we get on here and we talk like we've got all the answers. We don't. We've got experience, maybe,
Yeah,
with
sure.
trying to do these things ourselves, trying to get better, trying to grow, making mistakes. Garrett was very transparent at the beginning. He's made all the mistakes you can make as a leader, but I think that's how you do become great as a leader, is you make the mistakes
Yeah.
and learn from them,
There
right?
you go. There you go.
Not keep making them over and over and over again. So, Garrett, thanks for being here on the Lead Up podcast. How can our listeners learn more about you and find out more about what you do?
Yeah, well, hey, Mike, thank you for having me. It's a really great conversation. I appreciate it. I can be found on LinkedIn. Garrett Delph is my handle there. Also, our website is clarityops.co. Ton of content there, and people can see what we do and what we focus on.
Fantastic. Lead Up listeners, thanks for joining us today. Great conversation about leadership. What Gary and I hope is you make 2025 a great year of leadership growth. And that's what the Lead Up podcast is all about, is helping you step up to that next level of leadership so that you end the year better than it started. And we hope that you'll share this episode with your colleagues and friends in leadership that may be looking for answers to remove the vertigo that leadership can cause. Leave us a review on your favorite listening platform and continue to check out our next episode on the Lead Up podcast. We'll see you next time.